Hello and welcome to The Radical. I'm Christina.
And I'm Nicole. On our podcast, we delve into the roots of metaphysical wisdom.
That's right, Nicole. Our podcast is all about exploring those fundamental truths and practices that nourish your mind, body, and spirit.
Yes, Christina, we want to make metaphysical concepts easy to understand and accessible, especially for those who don't have a ton of time to do all the research.
Right? We'll do the research as well as share our experiences and perspectives, hoping to empower you, our listener, to find balance and magic in your day-to-day.
Inspired by the essence of the word radical, proceeding from the root, let's explore the roots of well-being and self-healing together.
This is The Radical with Christina and Nicole, two metaphysical girls in the material world.
Hello and welcome to The Radical. I'm Nicole.
I'm Christina.
Today's episode, Social Contracts and Societal Participation. We're really excited for this topic. Christina has a list for us, but before we jump into that, how does this topic, social contracts, tie into metaphysics? I learned a new term, epistemology, which means the philosophical study, that is, of knowledge. So metaphysics asks what exists, and epistemology asks how can we know what exists. So it's kind of like that hidden information that kind of governs what we know. And that made me reflect back to our fourth episode about Libra. We brought up jurisprudence, which means that upon which the actual rules of law are based. So upon what do we base our actual rules of law? What do we base our social contracts on? And it also reminded me of our last episode. We talked about dwarf planet Sedna, black moon Lilith, the feminine principle. And in that podcast episode, we stated that according to the scientific community, we only sense 5% of all reality.
That's crazy.
Western frameworks operate largely within the masculine principle, dualism, and is based on what is known or visible or observable, that 5%. As a result, what we really see in Western frameworks is a rejection of not only the feminine principle, but a suppression of indigenous knowledge and a dismissing of the realms that are more intuitive or spiritual.
Because they can't be measured or proven or quantified because they are unknown, they're unseen, they're unmeasurable.
Yes. Just a little introduction where my mind was at as we were putting together our notes for this episode. A lot of recurring themes and continuing discussions. So Christina has her list. In the second segment, we're going to dive into the concept of decolonization, and we'll wrap up with messages from the universe.
I was already late connecting for our meeting today, listeners, because I was so fired up on what I was putting on my notes together before we connected here. I had to send Nicole a text and be like, I'm coming, I'm connecting. I got so down a rabbit hole of following phrases as I was looking up the definition of these phrases and where they came from. So just starting right off the bat, starting with social contract is an implicit agreement among members of a society to cooperate for social benefits, sacrificing some individual freedom for state protection. And these theories of social contracts. This is from the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, from theorists. You might have heard of Thomas Hobbes, John Locke. I mean, I remember studying those a while ago. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And it was a means of explaining the origin of government and the obligations of subjects. So there's lots of layers that Nicole and I are going to be talking about. We're not going to be on this upper layer. So this is big picture. We pay taxes and obey laws of our state and country. We're not going to be there. We're going to be more on airplane social contracts and driving and things like that. But that is the definition of the big picture. To live in an organized society, you give up some individual freedoms to be a part of a community. Where we were talking the most about were societal social contracts relating to politeness, common courtesies, consideration, like considerate driving, and behavior in shared and public spaces, gender roles. Okay, now these are not laws. These are learned behaviors and most sufferably expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Social agreements and contracts themselves are not legally enforceable. Now, there's a few that I would say, and Nicole, you might have more, that generally should have the highest priority. Number one, safety. We should be looking out for the safety of elderly, physically impaired, children, animals, and all the other humans around us. Safety should always be the number one priority when we are in community. And in that way, looking out for each other. And these are my order, not like so safety was one, and then number two was boundaries for me. So we have a physical boundary, is that I, as a human adult, could have an expectation of not having another human adult touch me in a community space, especially if there's enough room for all of us to be there. So that could also be applied to sound, smell. I mean, but boundaries between people should be respected. That is another high priority. And flow of movement. Movement of people, movement of cars, movement of airplanes. You should have enough awareness about yourself to not impede the movement around you. And that goes from sitting down in the middle of a sidewalk to stopping your car somewhere so you can have a conversation and impeding the flow of traffic behind you. Those are kind of like the big ones that we do need to follow if we want to be out in the world. You want to be on a plane, you need to move along with everybody else. You need to sit down. That's just how it goes. The next note, and I already mentioned it, expectations. But your expectations are not your right. Never assume another person shares the same expectations as you. You have to ask first. Just talk to the other person. Ask and receive their answer without judgment. Sharing resources is not a right. Children do not have to share their toys. You do not have to pet my dog. And you do not get to request of me a behavior that I do like. Don't tell me to smile or try to hug me without my permission. Your expectations of what is a polite or expected action are not, you cannot assume that is the other person's. expectation, the other person's known way to interact. That's how you interact. That is not how everybody interacts. But I truly believe that especially children should not be required to smile at strangers, accept things from strangers, hug people they don't want to hug. Well, also like adults should be treated with the same respect. But I've seen that happen, and even though they're little people and they're not, voting age, they still have the right to be shy or scared or not wanting to do something.
This brings to mind trauma-informed
Mm-hmm.
training, the yoga community that me and you are now a part of. That's a big emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't give somebody, such as a child, a choice, that's when
Yeah.
trauma occurs. Christina said, ask first and receive their answer without judgment. Since COVID, something shifted for me. And I no longer love being touched or
Mm-hmm.
hugged or people kind of coming within my personal bubble without giving some kind of consent or permission.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have a reaction to that, and that disappointment can make you feel like, oh, do I just do it
Mm-hmm.
anyway?
Because of it's like people push you until you have to
Mm-hmm.
say no. If they would
Mm-hmm.
have just asked you initially, you could easily say no thank you. And if you just receive that no thank you without judgment, you don't have to push that person until it becomes a sharper response. Kids, pets, animals, opposite genders. And there's this element where it's going to happen. If you're traveling, you might be asked to switch a seat. If you're at a dog park, people are going to want to, touch, pet your dog or interact with your dog. If you're at a public concert, people are going to be in your space. You can't expect those things not to happen if you're in those spaces. What we need is to have a way to mindfully express what we need and what we don't need when we're interacting with other people. But there is no social contract at all, anywhere written, that's a law, that says you can pet my dog if I don't want you to. And I don't have to have a reason. I don't have to have he's in training, he's nothing. I could just say no. And that's it. With no judgment from either part. But that generally doesn't exist. There's more, people start building stories around it. Is why aren't you smiling today? Give me a smile. What? Give you a smile?
Yes.
What? Where did this come from? Why is it okay? And it hasn't happened in a minute to me that I've been requested to smile on demand by strangers, but it has happened. It has happened. I'm sure it's happened to everybody. But thankfully, the Me Too movement has brought to light boundaries and respect.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a position of authority, you have got to be aware. You need to ask, you need to respect. You cannot assume. And COVID also changed a lot of people's expected behavior and expected responses in public, which I like. I think we need to have a choice. Okay, this is my soapbox moment. But now back to what are social contracts. So those are some examples of expected behavior and why do people expect this. Let me see my notes. There's like 2 or 3 more things I have here. So polite. To be polite. Okay, now the definition of polite is closely tied to classism. I reject this. The definition of polite as an adjective showing regard for others in manners, speech, behavior, etc. Mannerly, well-mannered, socially correct in behavior. And then I Googled socially correct behavior. refers to actions and conduct that are generally considered appropriate and acceptable within a given social group or community. These are unwritten rules and norms that our community creates and agrees to. Tied to classism, polite society may refer to the upper class, polite society etiquette manners. We are so well past that. There was a time when people used to dress up to go fly on a plane. I mean, I was young enough that was how, when I flew that one time when I was a young person, it was a big event. Now that has changed because flying is now like getting in your car and driving. The expectation that people are going to hold on to this behavior is not going to happen. Time has moved on from there. Any type of behavior tied to classism or any type of politeness or well-manneredness tied to how much money you have or how much money you make or material wealth you have, that needs to be rejected because it shouldn't be an excuse either way, either why you do it or either why you don't do it. Classism, throw it out the window. Pleasantness versus kindness.
Ooh.
Do you know how you could be how you could show me personally the most kindness if we are ever out in public somewhere? Not you, Nicole, but like if you're a stranger. Don't talk to me. That is the kindest thing. Is just leave me alone. Let me sit and read my magazine. Let me walk 10 minutes with my dog. Let me stare out the window. Just leave me alone. That's kind to me. That could be the opposite for many of you listeners out there. That kindness to you is a conversation, is a smile, is a nod, is a hello, is a good morning. See, just that one basic thing and highlights how different we all are and how we expect different things in community spaces.
I think about traveling and I wear headphones. That's my nonverbal cue, and it means I'm not interested in small talk or conversation. And most people get the point. However, some people will tap you on the shoulder, will literally, from the window to the aisle, reach across the person in the middle to tap me on the shoulder and try to spark a conversation.
We just traveled recently, and we Nicole and I were traveling together, and this just happened to her. In movies, they call it the fourth wall, where you break into. So somebody put their hand in front of your face too very recently because they couldn't get your attention visually or auditory, so they broke into your tiny personal space to put a hand in front of your face. That's not okay. Everybody who's listening, unless the airplane's on fire or you're having a medical emergency, there's nothing you need to tell that person that you need to break into their personal space like that.
Right.
Okay, so pleasantness versus kindness. Is it necessary to acknowledge people you don't interact with? Brings us back to doing so can be considered good social practice. Well, what does good social practice mean? Who's deciding what a good social practice is? Generally defined by a community itself, based on shared values, norms, and expectations. Often involving social interaction and considering factors like respect, fairness, inclusivity, and positive impact on the collective well-being of the community. I don't like that it says that this is a basic courtesy.
It's so subjective. That can mean something different to me. I'm starting to think now about generational
Mm-hmm.
differences.
Mm-hmm. Because to me, it's rude for you to, I'm reading, in my mind, you are being rude to me by disturbing me and talking to me. You're, and not you, Nicole, but the other person is like, if I need to speak to this
Mm-hmm.
person because we're in this shared community space, I need to respect her and to show her a courtesy. Completely opposite frames of mind. Completely opposite frames of mind. That's how subjective and how experience wise this is. Social norms are unwritten rules that guide behavior within a community. So where do we, where do we learn these things? Where do these things come from? I'm getting there. Popular culture. Some people, that is the only aspect they think they know of American culture or Southern culture or East Coast culture, or how a 20-year-old acts or how a 50-year-old acts.
Or a woman or a man.
So there's popular culture that in driving these expectations that this is how you make friends, this is how you're going to meet your spouse, this is how you get a new job. And that is not
Mm-hmm.
based in reality. Another way is through culture and education. Some schools will talk about etiquette and social expectations. Definitely some schools are doing some gender role things. Your family,
Mm-hmm.
tradition, family expectations, and then where you are physically located. Are you an American or are you a European? Are you from the North? Are you from the South? Are you from Canada? Are you from
Mm-hmm.
Mexico? All of this. We have a very, oh my gosh, I want to use the word myopic, but I don't know if it's correct to say that we have very short sight in our experiences. I don't think that's right.
I, th-
Could be.
I think it is.
But we have a very short sight of what our
Mm-hmm.
community is. And even though, Nicole, you and I travel, I mean, we travel a good bit, but we don't travel as much as other people. So I have a little more experience in moving around different parts of the world and different parts of the country. And that's still a fraction of the cultures that are out there. And the way that the expectations are to behave in public are on all these different continents and all these different countries. Culture, popular culture, education, family, location, that is different for each individual person. But that doesn't mean that I'm saying we need to move through the world in a very self-centered way. Like I said, safety first, personal boundaries. We need to make sure we're making sure that as a society we're taking care of each other in that way. But not in the give me a hug way. No. I'll help you if you fall down, but you don't go up to a stranger and say, "Can I have a hug?" or "Give me a smile," or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do believe in the power of attraction. And you will receive back the energy you put out. So if you are unkind, or if you are too busy, or if you are rude, I didn't even talk about wait staff. So if you are receiving a service, you absolutely should acknowledge and treat that person with respect and your attention. Being rude or dismissive or aggressive to somebody who's assisting you, whether it's food, sales, any interaction in that realm, because you receive back what you get. And there's this thing about treat others how you want to be treated.
The golden rule.
I want to be ignored, so I ignore you. It's
Well,
not that easy.
I think the word rude is interesting in the sense that I, for a long time, thought if I had boundaries and enforced those boundaries, I was being
Mm-hmm.
rude because a lot of the times my boundaries did not align with the
Yeah.
expectation placed on me. So I felt I was being rude because I was letting somebody
Yeah.
down.
I have 2 cents. 2 cents left. Treat others how you want to be treated when in doubt. When in doubt, treat others how you want to be treated. But I'm also been exposed to a lot of people who are incredibly rude and dismissive to people providing a service for them, like waiters and
Mm-hmm.
waitresses going through the drive-through. That is a very mystifying behavior to me, and it makes me have just thoughts on maybe why somebody would be treating somebody that way. And I don't know. Just if that person is you, just ask yourself, maybe just notice why you feel angry or rushed, or this person isn't helping you in the way you want to be helped, and see if you can change your energy output to get a better interaction with the person who's helping you. Just notice if you're one of those people who have issue with that. Most social contracts aren't explicitly written down. They are open to interpretation by each individual person in your community. So what do? Don't assume anything. Ask first and leave your expectations at home.
These
Is
are
that all I
all
have to say? I'm like,
pretty much all tie back to the 4
I
agreements. I
know.
like it.
And don't take it personally when people say, no, this is the 4 agreements. The 4 agreements is how we react and how we relate to communities. This is it. Do your best. Don't assume. Don't take it personally. And what was the fourth one?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
No expectations. Is that it? Follow the 4 agreements when in doubt.
All right, social contracts. I took the lens of colonialism and looking at the social contracts imposed by colonialism
Mm-hmm.
and how in our modern social contracts their legacies, if you will, continue to show up. So according to National Geographic, colonialism occurs when one nation subjugates another, conquers its population, and exploits it, often forcing its own language and cultural values upon its people.
Mm.
Colonialism was practiced by empires such as the ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, and ancient Egyptians. But by far the most successful colonizer was the British Empire. At its height, shortly after World War I, the British Empire could boast territories in every time zone in the world. It was said that the sun never set on England's political and economic ambitions. Colonial powers often justified their conquests by claiming they had a legal and religious obligation to control the land and the culture of indigenous peoples. They argued that they were acting in the best interest of those whose lands and peoples they exploited. In the 15th century, Catholic popes laid out a religious justification for colonization, issuing the doctrine of discovery that asserted colonization was necessary to save souls and seize lands for the growth of the
Gosh.
church. Colonialism's impacts include environmental degradation, the spread of disease, economic instability, ethnic rivalries, and human rights violations. And a historian named John McQuaid says it takes a highly selective misreading of the evidence to claim that colonialism was anything other than a humanitarian disaster for the colonized. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, some history. We see the religious influence. We also see very obvious themes of greed and those with the power wanting more land, more power, more control. Religion was weaponized and used as justification to snuff out the spiritual beliefs and practices of the colonized indigenous people. We also see in colonialism white supremacy, this attitude that the colonizer knows better than the colonized, and this assumed role of superiority. So the antidote, the medicine for this is decolonization and rewriting social contracts based on colonization. I found a 2019 article published on the American Friends Service Committee website. And in it, this article explains that colonialism is not simply complicit in how we come to know ourselves, it also establishes hierarchies and systems of power. Colonialism scripts and violates the colonized as the violent other, in contrast to the colonizer, who is benevolent, right? The savior, innocent. The colonized are often described or portrayed as barbaric, as savage. Since all people have ingested colonial ideologies and mythologies, it is important to think of the work that must happen both internally and externally in order to decolonize our future, which will take daily commitment, changing the power dynamics. And really, this starts with us going inside ourselves and making new agreements. Simply put, decolonization can be viewed as an effort to dismantle the systems that are imposed upon really all of us and rewrite social contracts to reflect the needs, values, and voices of those who have historically been excluded.
That's like that little bit that I said on classism, that some of these social contracts and some of these social expectations are tied so heavily to the haves and the have-nots, which I reject. That if you don't dress a certain way or look a certain way, or if
Believe a certain
or
way.
if the expectation that I'm going to make a request of a stranger because I feel like I can, because of
Entitlement.
because of the way that I perceive them. And it's just, and that's why some of these social contracts and some of these odd things that are happening in today's age of people, what makes the news and what you read about people acting in these very bizarre ways when they're traveling or when they're at a restaurant, or these things happen and you're just like, where is this coming from? And generally, if it's not a medical emergency or a great misunderstanding, it has to do a little bit or a lot with entitlement and with classism
and power dynamics.
Yes.
And control. So if we're starting at the personal level, what can we do as individuals to decolonize ourselves and our thinking? So this little snippet is also from the American Friends Service Committee's website. We can begin to decenter whiteness and Western thought. We must welcome, accept, and center ideas, thoughts, history, perspectives that do not place white people and their ideologies at the forefront of conversations, decisions, and laws.
Gosh, if you talk about patriarchy, about white male figures having that authoritative position, do you? I'm sorry, I didn't read your notes.
Not explicitly, but I think that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
inherently at the core of Western
Yeah.
framework because of the sort of Euro Christian
Yes. Yes.
frameworks.
That,
And traditionally, white men in the Catholic and
yes.
Christian faiths have been the ones holding the power. And in these classist societies, the top of the
Yes.
hierarchy are what
Yeah.
it's you find the white
Yes.
men.
I'm putting that in decolonizing, throwing down the patriarchy.
So what can we actually do? How do we take action as individuals? So one way is looking at our habits as consumers. Christina and I talk about this a lot. We have talked about it in many of our previous podcasts. I know we talked about it in Hallmark Holidays, but it has come up also in our Purchasing Power podcast. We have a lot of global supply chains that exploit the environment, that culturally appropriate certain items like Sherpa or sage.
Yeah.
So, as consumers, and we talked about this in our resolutions podcast, I want to reduce my reliance or entirely end my reliance on Amazon. Can I opt for locally owned businesses instead? Can I seek out companies who have ethical and sustainable practices? Can I do things like purchase bay leaves instead of white sage? Can I educate myself more on what it is I'm purchasing and where it's coming from? And if anyone or anything is being harmed in the
Mm-hmm.
process. Also, to start to decolonize ourselves, aligning with the pagan belief that spirits dwell in all things, inanimate objects, animate objects. When we view items with this greater sense of respect and sanctity, it almost naturally makes consumerism and participating in the capitalistic society
Mm-hmm.
incompatible. You can't participate in the consumeristic more if you are in harmony with your needs and the objects around you. You kind of naturally stop buying things you don't need. You start appreciating what you have, and that want or need to acquire more tends to go away.
And you're not a consumer, you're an experiencer. I used going to the zoo as what you're seeing and hearing and walking and moving. It is not about what you are buying and eating. That does not have to be a part of it. That consumeristic, and all of that is single use plastic and paper, unless you're, and the zoo that is by me does not have that kind of situation. It is like a fast food thing. But anyway, that's the bit there, is that we don't have to be consumers of these things.
Another way to decolonize on the individual level is to build your community, to find your tribe. A lot of the narratives that correspond to these Western frameworks that we've been talking about, there's this notion of we have to look out for ourselves, resources are scarce. That plays into this acquiring and getting more and more
Mm-hmm.
and more. It's a fear based
Oh, and the
narrative.
scarcity mindset where if you have some, that means there's less for me, which isn't true.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. So when we come into community, and this is also from the American Friends Service Committee, when we come together in community, the idea of not enoughness is spread
Yeah.
globally by the ideology of colonialism, upholding false perceptions of scarcity and emptiness.
And that's why people sometimes get irrational when we're in large groups doing activities. Because if you have a seat and you have a seat and you have a seat, I don't have a seat on the plane, or I need a better seat, or I need something different. It's a scarcity complex, which is put into
It,
place, and they want us to be afraid. The
yes.
patriarchy wants us afraid and separate and oh
Mhm.
my gosh.
I
Oh
think
my
this was
gosh.
behind that lack mentality, that scarcity. There's the not
Yeah.
enoughness was behind the great toilet paper shortage
Absolutely.
of 2020.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. And it's tied to colonization, patriarchy, scarcity complex, social contracts, expectations.
Mhm.
And these are learned behaviors. We're taught this. Now that I'm going to be 50 this coming year. Now I know it's not true, but I didn't know this when I was 20 and 30 when I was in the workforce, when I was like doing the majority of my
Mhm.
shopping and traveling and you know what I mean, being out in the world. I know it now, but I didn't know it then because that the way you're the expectations on the way that you're going to act and the way you're going to be and the way you're going to shop and the way you're going to treat people and the way that you expect to be treated is taught to us.
Mhm. My final note is tolerance is liberty.
It is.
When we can accept somebody else's no thank you, when we can tolerate all
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
and accept all people, that's really what liberty is about. It's not just the liberty for those in power.
If it is not causing harm and if it's
Mhm.
legal, why does it bother you that they're doing it or not doing it? That says a lot of that says a lot
Precisely.
more about where we are in our lives than it does about those people or that person or whatever it is. Whatever's making you angry, you need to look at that. That person that's irritating you on the like as you're waiting in line at the grocery store, why
Mhm.
because of what they're saying, because of the way they smell, because what, they're not hurting you. What is your irritation there? That says more about us than it does them.
Yes. And you can apply tolerance as liberty to that situation because your liberty,
Mm-hmm.
your freedom comes from tolerating
Yes.
and accepting that in others, which you may find irritating. And it's irritating you because it's grinding up against something within
Yes.
you. So that person, that incident, that situation is your
Mm-hmm.
teacher to show you where you are not liberated, where you are not free. And as we grow in our tolerance and acceptance of others, we are participating in liberty for all, but we are liberating
Mm-hmm.
ourselves.
That is coming to grips with your another way to come into your shadow side is what exactly is bothering you about other people and social situations. What is it? Why is it? I have so I to go back, I have one final note here is that and I believe this, Nicole, I believe this. I think generally everybody is doing a great job. I think we've had, like we mentioned, the Me Too movement, we mentioned the COVID pandemic. Things are happening in our society, and we are learning really hard lessons, and some people are learning them very gracefully and graciously. Some people are still rejecting them, but I think as a whole, people are all doing the best that they can. And we are taking care of each other, and we are being kind, and we are respecting each other's boundaries. I mean, I just did a ton of travel last year, and I didn't have any issues. Nicole always has. She, it's it's kind of a running joke now that I'm like, "How was your flight?" And she's like, "You did you see this? Did you hear that?" I'm like, "Nope." I had my nobody put their hand in front of my face. But my experience clearly is, even though we're on the same plane, we're having different experiences. But I think everybody is doing the best that they can, and we are doing generally a good job. We talk about and we notice, and what gets reported on the news is that one person that, had an issue on a plane. Thousands of people fly every day. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people fly on airplanes and on roads every day. We get reports on this one person or this one family or this other thing. That means that generally everybody is looking out for each other and
Mm-hmm.
doing the best that they can to make sure that they are fitting into that societal contract that when you buy a plane ticket, your expectation is that you're going to get on the plane and you're going to be delivered to the next airport, that we are being kind to each other on the way there. The other thing that I think that we need to work on is driving. I don't know if it's because when I learned to drive, but I didn't have a cell phone when I was driving, and I don't look at my cell phone now. And I'm not going to blame it entirely on distracted driving with cell phones or with whatever people are doing or the technology that's in their cars. And it's not young drivers because we've always had young drivers, and it's not old drivers because we've always had older drivers. Something has shifted, and people are not looking out for each other as well as they did when we're driving, as far as like following the flow of traffic, using your indicators, not tailgating, this road rage situation. Is that as a culture, we need to kind of figure out what we're doing here and see if we can stop it. It's dangerous. Driving is significantly more dangerous than any other form of travel. I mean, besides, flying in space. But we've got to do this a little better for each other. We got to take care of each other a little bit better on the roads. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
So those are my two.
I have a lot to say on the driving bit, but we do need to get to Messages from the Universe. I'm using the Medicine Woman Tarot by Carol Bridges.
Oh.
I have selected 3 cards. If you like choosing card 1, 2, or 3, now would be your time to do that. And our first card is the 9 of Arrows, which traditionally would translate to the swords, the suit of swords. And the message, it's short, but the message for the 9 of Arrows is overcome doubt and fear by trusting your decision.
Mm.
Our next 2 cards are reversed. Reversed cards may mean that the energy is not fully actualized in that particular realm, but is on its way from inner to outer expression. So you could keep that in mind. For our second card, as well as our third, but our second card is the 6 of Stones, or the suit of Pentacles. Restore balance to your accounts. And because this is more inwardly focused, I kind of read this as like your emotional account, your physical account, your spiritual account, kind of like bank accounts, but for yourself, and making sure your inner accounts and your inner worlds are in harmony.
Mm.
And then we have the 7 of Pipes as our third card. This is the suit of Wands. Overcome doubt by action of the self unbound.
I like those. I like those cards. I like that deck.
I like this deck too.
That's not even a fraction of what we can say on social contracts.
Oh, I'm starting to look at this now as just an ongoing conversation.
This is just the first conversation we're having at this. I just glanced at my notes and I was like, oh, forgot. Oh, I want to say, nope, I want that one. Nope.
We will be revisiting, I'm sure. I mean, all these topics, as you can see kind of from the introduction, they really flow into each other, and there's a lot of overlap and shared themes, but this is metaphysics. So I am really grateful that you tuned in today and listened to this episode. Thank you, listeners.
Thank you for letting us both get on our soapboxes and getting a lot off of our chest for a little bit in this episode. Thank you, listeners. And email us. Send us what your thoughts on this. Send us a note. Let us know what you think, what you're thinking. Did we miss any big points? Send us an email.
And we'll be back next week. We're talking about Aquarius. Talk to you then. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Radical. The Radical is written and produced by Nicole and Christina.
Listener questions can be emailed to us at theradicalpodnc@gmail.com.
Our Instagram is The Radical Pod.
Music by Van Horton. His Instagram is Van Horton Music.